Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. Week 11 is in the books, and in this video, we will take a look back at the week that was and the quarterbacks for Week 12. I like to use the winning lineup from the Draftkings Millie Maker contest as my measuring stick each week. But before we look at the winning lineup, I want to recap the top five at each position. The top five in Week 11 were as follows. The quarterbacks, Garoppolo led the way with a score of 34.66. Prescott, 34.56. Josh Allen from Buffalo, 33.84. Lamar Jackson, 33.48. And Driscoll from Detroit, 27.46. The running backs were as follows. Christian McCaffrey, 33.10. Ingram, 23.50. Kamara, 22.20. Ezekiel Elliott, 20.30. And Gus Edwards from Baltimore, 20.20. Wide receivers, John Brown from Buffalo, 37.70. DJ Chark from Jacksonville, 33.40. Ridley from Atlanta with 31.30. Michael Thomas, 28.40. And Gallup from Dallas with 26.80. Tight ends, Griffin led the way from the Jets with 24.90. Zach Ertz was next with 18.40. Rudolph, 17.70 from Minnesota. Andrews from Baltimore, 17.50. And Dwelly from San Francisco with 17.40. Defensive special teams, Falcons scored 26 fantasy points. The Saints, 17. The Ravens, 15. The 49ers, 14. And the Raiders, 13. An interesting correlation that I noticed was that the top five at each position had a straight-up one-loss record of 4-1 for each position, and the top five defensive special teams were all 5-0. The winning lineup for DraftKings Millie Maker had a winning score of 221.64 points, which is low in comparison to the other weeks. This was the winning lineup. Josh Allen at quarterback, as I mentioned, scored 33.84 points. Running back Christian McCaffrey, 33.10 points. Singletary from Buffalo, 8.90 points. John Brown from Buffalo, 37.70 points. Ridley from Atlanta, 31.30 points. Devontae Parker from Miami, 23.50 points. Griffin from the Jets, 24.90 points. Deebo Samuel from the 49ers for 24.40 points. And the Minnesota Vikings was the defense special teams. They had scored 4 points. He used all of his salary in that lineup, $50,000. And some of the ownerships, Allen was fairly low owned at quarterback at 3.79%. McCaffrey was one of the highest owned at 23.36%. Singletary from Buffalo, 12.3%. John Brown, 5.86%. Ridley from Atlanta, 6.13%. Devontae Parker from Miami, 3.91%. Griffin from the Jets, 3.81%. Deebo Samuel, he had pretty high ownership at 25.47%. He was pretty popular because of the injury to Emmanuel Sanders and the price. He was only 4,000. And the Vikings were 13.21%, which was kind of high. That was a team stack of Josh Allen, Singletary, and John Brown. And brought it back with Devontae Parker in that game. So that was the game stack. Week 11 was the worst week by far for me. You could have created a lineup from the player pool that I had created, and you could have doubled your money. And that would have been a lineup that consisted of Dak Prescott at quarterback, who scored 34.60 points. Alvin Kamara, who scored 22.20 points. Marlon Mack, who scored 19.90 points and was on his well on his way to an even bigger game before he fractured his hand. Michael Thomas at 28.40 points. Ted Ginn, 9.40 points. D.D. Westbrook was 7.20 points. Dwelly, 17.40 points. Joe Mixon, 17.30 points. And defense special team Cardinals with 5 points for a score of 161.40. I won't spend much time on that. It makes me eager to get back to work and start dissecting Week 12. A quick look ahead at the Week 12. There are 11 games this week on the main slate. And where I like to begin each week is by first taking a look at the lines and totals. I do this because I'm interested in the totals or the games that have the highest totals, because these are going to be games that have the players necessary to do the scoring for them to be um, high scoring games. Now that's not where I stop. I start. I mean, I look at every game and I'm looking for really good matchups. Sometimes I might pluck a player from a game that might be the lowest on the board. I factor matchups into a lot of this, and but I do like to start with the games that have the higher totals. And if you look at a lot of the winning lineups from the Millie Maker and other contests, a lot of these winning lineups have players from the games with the higher totals. But a quick look at Week 12, the lines and totals. Tampa Bay at Atlanta is the highest total on the board. Atlanta's been installed as a 4-point home favorite, and the over/under on that game is 53 points. These were the opening lines. Seattle at Philly. Seattle's a 2.5-point road favorite with a game total of 49. Carolina's at New Orleans. New Orleans a 9.5-point home favorite, game total of 48 points. Dallas visits the Patriots. Patriots have been installed as a 6.5-point home favorite. Over under is 46. Oakland at the Jets, kind of an odd position for the Raiders. Oakland is a 3-point road favorite. The over under is 45.5 points. Miami's at Cleveland. Cleveland's a 10.5-point home favorite. Over under on this game is 44. Detroit at Washington. Detroit's a 3.5-point road favorite with an over under of 42, and Matt Stafford won't be in that game. That's interesting that with Driscoll, they're going to be a road favorite. Jacksonville at Tennessee. Tennessee's a 3-point home favorite. The over-under on this game is 41.5 points. Excuse me. The Giants are at Chicago. Chicago's a 6-point home favorite. Over-under is 40.5 points. Pittsburgh visits the Bengals. Pittsburgh's been installed as a 7-point road favorite. The over-under is 39 points. And Denver is at Buffalo. Buffalo's a 4.5-point home favorite, and the over/under is 37 points. So there you go with the over and unders. So now what I want to do is just transition right into the quarterbacks for Week 12. But before we unpack the quarterbacks for Week 12, I'm going to take a quick glance back at quarterbacks in Week 11. I know we just did that, but I want to share some other numbers with you, some other than just their scoring. As I mentioned, the top 5 projected quarterbacks in Week 11 were as follows. Lamar Jackson led the way, followed by Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott, Drew Brees, and Josh Allen. The actual top 5 scoring, which we already covered, but I just want to reemphasize this. Garoppolo led the way with 34.66 fantasy points. Prescott was next with 34.56 fantasy points. Josh Allen, 33.84 fantasy points. Lamar Jackson, 33.48 fantasy points. And Driscoll from Detroit, 27.46 fantasy points. Another thing I want to share with you is the ownership in Week 11. And Lamar Jackson led the way for the quarterbacks with 16.33 ownership, and this was for large GPP tournaments, so they're pretty similar across the different contests. Prescott was next with 7.76% ownership. Drew Brees followed Prescott with 7.61% ownership. Derek Carr 7.21% ownership, and Kyle Allen from Carolina was fifth with 6.44% ownership. Now these top 5 scoring quarterbacks in Week 11 averaged 34.8 pass attempts. They averaged 311 passing yards. They scored an average of 32.8 fantasy points between the 5 of them, and they accounted for 16 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns. Now to Week 12. I have developed this chart that you see here on the screen to make it easier to follow along as I share numbers with you and reference these numbers to different quarterbacks. I didn't do it this time. I usually highlight all the way to the left the quarterbacks in green that I'm going to be targeting. But I'll just break that down for you, and you can follow along. I encourage you to use this chart however you want. If you want to screenshot it, I haven't figured out a way that I could actually drop a link for this where you could just follow a link to it. But pause the video, however you want to use it. But I just want to refresh for anybody that may be new. Obviously, the red is the worst, yellow is middle of the road, and green is the best. Now, this is in comparison to the rest of it. It doesn't mean that, like, red up here for Russell Wilson doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback, but that price in comparison to Allen for 4,600, that would mean this price being so high is obviously the worst in this category. You can jump right over here to this category, pass attempts per game. Second quarterback on the list is Matt Ryan. He's averaging 39 pass attempts per game. That's why he's in green. When you drop down here to someone like Tannehill, it's in red because it's 22.7 in comparison to the ones in the green. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but the categories that I use for the quarterbacks up here at the top, and there's other things that I factor in as well for each position. And with my quarterbacks, I like to have at least one target, and you'll see that comparison when I do the wide receiver video. But up here at the top, you obviously have the name, the team, the salary, their opponent, how many pass attempts a game they're averaging for the season, their completion percentage for the season, how many fantasy points a game they're scoring, how many fantasy points a game their opponent is allowing, the opponent rank. For some reason, I didn't have that filled in, but it coincides with the opponent fantasy points allowed. And this is the implied total, how many points this team is implied to score in relation to the over-under that's been set for the game in Vegas. The over-under with the point spread gives you your implied total. So without further ado, these are the quarterbacks I'm going to be targeting in week 12, and try to follow along with me. I used to just spill out a bunch of numbers and useful numbers, a lot of these same numbers here. And I know it's kind of hard to follow without a visual, and this just gives you something that you can reference to. And when we do lineup building, I'll these quarterbacks that I'm going to point out are going to be the ones that I use for my player pool. They're going to be the ones I use in an optimizer, and we'll build from there. So, number one on my list is Matt Ryan. This is a fantastic matchup for Ryan. Second highest implied total on the slate with 28 points. Tampa Bay's DVP versus the quarterback is number 31. They allow 25.9 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. This is the highest game total on the slate, 53 points, as I had mentioned earlier. The lines and totals. Atlanta is a 4-point home favorite. The total on the game was 53 points. That was the opening line. A lot of green straight across for Matt Ryan, and I just feel like this is a superb matchup for him. Tampa Bay's pretty stingy versus the run. Freeman has not been cleared to play. A lot of people were on Brian Hill last week for Atlanta because he had a big game the week prior versus Carolina, and that didn't work out so well. His ownership was I believe he actually had one of the highest ownerships on the main slate, but Atlanta is going to do their damage through the air with Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, and Hooper's been ruled out already. So it's going to be the Jones, Ridley, and Gage. And with this being the highest total on the board, I really believe this game definitely has potential to shoot out. Atlanta's been playing pretty good defense the last few weeks. I'm not sure that that's something that's written in stone, that they're suddenly shut down defense. Excuse me. I believe Jameis Winston is going to throw the ball all over the place, and this is going to be a back and forth. This is a division game in Atlanta. Give the edge to them, and I definitely will have some share of Matt Ryan. Next is Drew Brees, and I would actually have Brees in yellow. Yellow means I'm kind of on the fence. Um, this the Saints have the highest implied total on the main slate, 28.3 points. You'll see here in this last column. But it's a difficult matchup. Carolina only gives up 17.5 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, and they have a DVP of 12. If Bradbury is back, excuse me, for Carolina, and he matches up against Michael Thomas, that does hurt Breeze. I believe that the person that's going to have probably the bigger game in this situation is probably going to be Kamara, because Carolina is absolutely horrible against the running game. Breeze has a 75.4% completion percentage, and he's always in play. He's averaging 34.2 fantasy points per game. They're at home. I don't know that in particular that this game's going to shoot out. New Orleans is real stingy against the run. I do not believe they'll totally shut out Christian McCaffrey. And Kyle Allen just had an absolutely horrible game last week, but he's been targeting DJ Moore, so they're probably going to, the way to move the ball on New Orleans is through the air, and I believe they'll get some of that done. And Bradbury's had a lot of luck against Thomas, and that goes right back to Breeze. I mean, Breeze, obviously his favorite target is Michael Thomas, so he's probably going to have to get it done in some other areas. I don't think Thomas gets completely shut out, but I believe that Breeze is probably going to be throwing the ball around to other places. As I said, I kind of got him on the fence, because the path to victory for New Orleans could actually be through the running game, which is Kamara and Murray. But you always have to consider Breeze. If he's $100 less than Ryan, and I like Ryan a lot, so if I probably got up to Breeze, I'd probably be figuring out a way to spend the extra 100 and get up to Ryan. That's just my preference. Next up is Jameis Winston. Now, quick note, it's not on this board, but Winston, in the games he's played in Atlanta, he's averaging 27 fantasy points per game in Atlanta. He's always in play. He's averaging 40.6 pass attempts per game, the most on this slate. Excuse me. Now his completion percentage is really low, 59.6. Atlanta is giving up 22.6 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. The implied total is kind of low, 23.5, and that might be skewed a little bit because of Atlanta's recent what seems to be their role as a shutdown defense the last couple of weeks. I don't think that's the case this week at all. I do. Now, Winston turns the ball over a lot, but he still scores a lot of fantasy points because he puts the ball in the air so much. He gets a lot of yards, but he doesn't play defense, so he's just trying to keep pace with what the defense gives up. And as I mentioned, he's averaging 26.43 fantasy points the last 7 games versus Atlanta, and 27 points per game in Atlanta. So he's played there. He's familiar with it. This game has the highest total on the board, 53 points. I really like it. There's probably going to be a lot of ownership to a lot of different pieces in this game. But one contrarian move might be to go to Winston, pivot off of Matt Ryan. He's only $500 less, but still cheaper, and the ownership will probably go to Ryan since he's home. Next up, Derek Carr from Oakland, 6,100. Second highest completion percentage on the main slate, 72.3%. Very high. Carr's having quietly a really good year. Now, he doesn't put the ball in the air that much. Josh Jacobs has been a tremendous addition to their team at running back But the Jets are real stingy versus the run. They are very beat up, though. They're Mosley's out again, but they're giving up a lot of yards and a lot of passes to the wideouts. They have a 22 DVP versus the quarterback position. And there's a lot of affordable pieces in this game to stack, and this could possibly be the sneaky stack to pivot off of that Atlanta Tampa Bay game. The Jets are giving up 20.6 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. There's an implied total of 24.8 points for Carr. They're a road favorite, which is an odd situation for Oakland. So we'll see. I do think that this game is going to be high scoring. I think the Jets are going to be able to move the ball through the air, and I think Carr and the Raiders are going to move the ball through the air with Williams and Waller. And as I said, the Jets are real stingy versus the run, so it might be difficult for them to get Josh Jacobs involved, but they are very beat up on the defensive side of the ball. After Carr is Brady. Brady 6,000. He's averaging the second most pass attempts per game at 40.2 pass attempts per game, 63.7 completion percentage. He's averaging 19 fantasy points per game. Dallas has only given up 16 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, but this has a really high implied total, third highest on the main slate, 26.3 fantasy points. Brady, I feel like they're going to have to. This is another team that's going to have to move the ball through the air, and I believe that James White and Edelman will have a real big piece of this game. Now, I am admittedly a Dallas Cowboy fan. This is a very difficult matchup for Dallas going to New England, and I can see this being a game where Brady comes out and just spreads the ball all over the place. He likes to do that. Obviously, averaging 40 pass attempts per game, and that's pretty quietly. Not a lot of people probably have noticed that, and I think the ownership on him will be low because of the other games with the game total is 46 points, so it's the fourth highest on the main slate. And I'll have some pieces of that because I feel like that's the game plan for New England is to come out and get the ball to James White in space out of the backfield, get it to Edelman, do the things that they do. Their wide receivers don't really scare you, so to speak. Ben Watson, that tight end. But I feel like Brady's probably going to dink 'em, dunk 'em up and down the field. And their defense is really stingy. It's going to be hard for Dallas to move the ball and keep pace with them. I don't see this game being a shootout, but I do feel like Brady's going to do his damage through the air versus Dallas. After Brady is Mayfield. Mayfield's at home, 5,900. Now this has been the thing to do this year is take the quarterback and the pieces that go with the quarterback and play them against Miami. Mayfield is averaging 34 pass attempts per game. He's got a really low completion percentage, 59.2% completion percentage. He's only averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game. Miami's given up 22.6 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, and this is the third highest implied total on the board with 27.5 fantasy points. This is really intriguing, and it's kind of like pick what you want to do. And Mayfield is actually going to be in yellow because I'm kind of on the fence. I believe that Beckham and Landry could absolutely have their way with Miami if they wanted to do that. And there's a narrative going for Landry. It's a revenge game, obviously, versus Miami. It's his birthday, all kinds of things. But this has the markings of a Nick Chubb game and I'll get to that when I talk about running backs in my running back video, but that's what scares me about Mayfield. I don't know how much they'll have to do through the air. Their defense is decent. I don't think that Miami has any offensive parts that give them an advantage. And I think they're going to be shut. I just feel like this is a shutdown Chubb, Kareem Hunt, and come away with the win. I don't think they'll have to do much through the air. They might do a little bit, but I don't think they're going to have to do a whole lot. So that's why I temper my expectations. I like the price at 5,900, and probably be low ownership, and it's appealing because of playing Miami. Like I said, that's been the thing to do this year. Play the quarterback, and last week Josh Allen, he was in the top 5 scoring for quarterbacks, and playing Miami. John Brown was the top wide receiver last week versus them. And that creates recency bias for players like Beckham and Landry this week. But the over under is 44 points, and a lot of times the teams that are favored by the most, I tend to like those quarterbacks in those games, and they're the biggest favorite. Excuse me, on the board at 10.5 points. But I really feel like they can do it with their running game, and that's the path to victory of least resistance, not having to put the ball in the air. So temper your expectations. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we do the lineup building and look at some ownership. I'll have a few small shares of Mayfield, but not much. After Mayfield is Allen from Carolina. Allen's definitely in yellow. He had an absolute dud last week. He's averaging 35.5 pass attempts per game. So he's in the top in that category. 61.6% completion percentage. He's only averaging 13.9 fantasy points per game. New Orleans has given up 19.5 points per game to the quarterback position, and they have a really low implied total of 18.8 fantasy points in New Orleans. New Orleans is very stingy versus the run. I do feel that McCaffrey is matchup proof, but actually McCaffrey is a wide receiver 1 and a running back 1. So if they can't give it to him, they'll just throw it to him. And that's where Allen comes in. And he's been targeting DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is a tough matchup for New Orleans this week. I'm not sure if Lattimore will be on him, but he has been targeting Moore a ton. And like I said, last week he definitely laid an egg in that game, and kind of look for him to bounce back. Like that price, 5,200, with the results from last week. That's probably going to cause a negative recency bias, and a lot of people might be off of him for that reason. So he might be an interesting piece. He might, in a game stack, pivot off Breeze and then bring it back with some of the big parts from New Orleans. The game total is, what was that again? I'm sorry, 48, so third highest on the slate. But they're a big underdog of 9.5 points in New Orleans. So I'll have some small shares of him. Be careful. And, he's only scoring 13.9 fantasy points per game. But when you got Christian McCaffrey, McCaffrey's over half of their offense. And as I mentioned, another big part of their offense is Moore. But I will have some shares of him in lineups that I want to spend up at other positions. Last, I'm going to go back up here to the top. Russell Wilson, I thought about it, and I'm going to have some shares. It's the second highest total on the board, and I like to have some shares of those games. Now, Philadelphia is number 15 versus the quarterback, and they're stingy versus the run. They're number 8 versus the running back position. Ideally, Seattle wants to run the ball against Philadelphia, control this game, and not let Wentz get out there and move the ball with Ertz up and down the field. he's, I mean, obviously everyone knows he's in the running for the MVP of the league right now. He's got 68.5 completion percentage, averaging 25.3 fantasy points per game. Philadelphia's only given up 18.6 fantasy points per game, and the implied total is not super high, 23.3 fantasy points. They are a road favorite in Philadelphia. I just feel that the game script of this game could um, uh, make him have to put the ball in the air, as if Philadelphia is able to shut down Carson. Now, if Seattle's able to get the lead, control the game with Carson, he's going to have a dud week at the quarterback position as he just manages the game. And 6,800, it'll be really hard to get value on that if it's that type of game. But Phil, there are some weaknesses in that Seattle defense on the pass defense side, and I see them being able to put some points on the board, which is what you want if you take Seattle. You want Philadelphia to be able to score some points, and if you're going to obviously stack this game, you want to, if you want to have Wilson and Lockett, keep an eye on Lockett. He's got a questionable tag, and that's concerning because that's Wilson's favorite target. He does have Josh Gordon now, and he's got three pretty good targets to go with Lockett, Metcalf, and Gordon. Um, and he does a lot of damage with the tight ends that you've never heard of until they've already done the damage that they've done. But I have him yellow right now. I'm going to look at ownership, and I probably won't spend all the way. If I was there, I would probably go to Ryan. I just like that game more. If you look at this chart too, it's fairly easy to follow. I mean, I like to green all the way across. There's one that's sticking out, and that's Matt Ryan. So I'm going to have more shares of him than anybody. But I did want to include Wilson, as I mentioned, second highest implied total on the board, 49 points, and I'll definitely have some shares of Russell Wilson. Very minimal. I don't MME. Meaning I don't play the 150 lineups. I would if I could. I definitely don't have anything against anybody that does do that. I'm just not in the situation to do that. So I build a few lineups that I like and put them in different contests. I do max out maybe like the quarters, and I might put 10 in the $1. I like to play some of the GPPs, some of the cash double ups, and just mix it up and just get a variety. But I'll have some small, and when I say I'm going to have small shares, that's what I mean. I might have one or two lineups with Wilson. That way I just have that covered in case he would, if this game would shoot out and Wilson's on the end of putting up a big game. Plus he adds a little bit of a running game to his repertoire as well, which we've seen in the last game against San Francisco when they put the first loss on San Fran. And it was actually, I believe, a 21-yard run that pretty much set up the game-winning drive. I try to focus on the quarterbacks from the games, as I mentioned, that are the large favorites and/or the games that have the teams that have the higher implied totals. Quarterbacks versus teams that force teams to pass the ball, that factors into game scripts. That's what I'm saying. If I want a team, say we were talking about Allen down here, and New Orleans is very stingy against the run, and New Orleans is a large home favorite, which tells me that it might be somewhat difficult, but it tells me that Carolina and Allen are going to have to try to put the ball in the air to get the job done in this game. I look for those type of things, the game script. I try to play them out and factor in the lines and the totals. Vegas isn't stupid. I obviously have a lot of faith in the numbers that they set out there. They're not in the business of giving away money, and they set these lines and totals for a reason. And that's how I build my lineups and identify the players. Now each different position, I feel like the lines and totals play a different part. But for the quarterbacks, I definitely am interested in the implied totals and the game totals and things like that. So summing up the quarterbacks, I will be targeting in week 12 again. And next time I'll remember to highlight these for you guys. For me is Matt Ryan. Well, let's just start up here. Russell Wilson. I'm actually going to have Wilson in yellow, and we'll talk about this more on the lineup building. Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Jameis Winston, Derek Carr, Tom Brady, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Allen, and that is it. There's 8 of them, right? Russell Wilson 1, Ryan 2, Brees 3, Winston 4, Carr 5, Brady 6, Mayfield 7, and Kyle Allen 8. Those are the 8. And I do reserve the right to change this list, but I'll share that with you guys when we do the lineup building. If I add or subtract, I usually keep my quarterbacks about the same unless there's an injury or something. None of these guys have injury concerns. I did see something earlier today which I feel like was ridiculous. They said Tom Brady's questionable because of his elbow. I think however many years he's been in the NFL, he's 90% of the time Belichick lists Brady as questionable, so I don't put much belief into that. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. It helps me out a lot if you do that. I encourage you to post any comments or opinions below. I try to answer them all, and I welcome any views that you may have. If there's anything you'd like to see me add to this chart next week, I'll obviously make sure the opponent rank is in there. The opponent rank, though, as I mentioned, is the exact. It'll be the same color as the opponent's fantasy points allowed. It's just a number ranking, and Tampa Bay is actually the worst on this slate versus the quarterback position, and then it goes on down. So if you do me a favor, it helps me out a lot if you please share this video, like it, subscribe, hit that notification bell. As I mentioned, that helps me out a ton. You can also follow me on Twitter at winningabout. I'll be posting the running back video shortly, and I'll see you guys real soon. And then tomorrow we'll be doing lineup building. I'm actually going to be doing the running back video after this one, followed by wide receiver. And tomorrow I'll do tight end, defense, special teams, and lineup building. So thanks again for joining me. I'll see you again real soon. My name is Ty Patton. This is All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. Have a good evening.